This is the second part of our lecture on Argentina, on the Empire Strikes Back against Argentina, which will be 45B, and this will be chapter 62 in next year's ABCs of Communism, Bolshevism 2017, when that comes out. And we stopped last time when we had gotten up to the end of the military dictatorship the CIA had set up that had failed miserably in all respects. Of course, in addition to failing economically and politically in all respects, it had established one of the most atrocious records since Nazi Germany in terms of the way it dealt with people. But of course, this is exactly what the CIA wanted. They wanted fascist regimes in all of South America. They had just set one up in Chile, which was going to last a few years longer than this one, as it turned out. But at any rate, we reviewed all of that. Now, on October 30th of '83, the Argentines went to the polls to choose a president, a vice president, and national, provincial, and local officials in elections found by international observers to be fair and honest, and the country returned to a constitutional rule after Raúl Alfonsín, candidate of the Radical Civic Union, Unión Cívica Radical, UCR, received 52% of the popular vote for president. And he then began a 6-year term of office on December 10th of that year, 1983. And he was president from '83 through '89. Now, 5 days after his inauguration, he created the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons, CONADEP, led by the Argentine writer Ernesto Sabato. However, it was also under Alfonso's presidency that the December 24th, '86 full stop law was voted, granting amnesty to all acts committed before December 10th, '83, amid pressure from the Army. It would not be, and Navy, and it would not be until the June 2005 Supreme Court decision to overturn all these amnesty laws that investigations of these criminals would be started again. During the Alfonso administration, a Treaty of Peace and Friendship of '84 between Chile and Argentina was signed, and the roots of the Mercosur trade bloc were established. Now, in 1985 and '87, large turnouts for midterm elections demonstrated continued public support for a strong and vigorous renewed democratic system in Argentina. The UCR-led government took steps to resolve some of the nation's most pressing problems, including accounting for those who had disappeared during the military rule, establishing civilian control of the armed forces, and consolidating democratic institutions. One of the biggest achievements of the Alfonso administration was the reduction of corruption in public offices, which was reduced by half, some said, during his administration, which I guess means that the other half are still stealing as much as they could get. Well, at any rate. However, constant friction with the military, failure to resolve several economic problems inherited from the military dictatorship, and great opposition from the labor unions minimized Alfonso's success, and accordingly he resigned after losing the '89 election, leaving office 6 months early. Now we have the Carlos Menem decade, '89 to '99. As President, Carlos Menem, the Peronist candidate that won the '89 election, launched a major overhaul of Argentine domestic policy. Large-scale structural reforms dramatically reversed the role of the state, that is the government, in Argentine economic life. Ironically, the Peronist Menem oversaw the privatization of many of the industries Perón had nationalized. A decisive leader pressing a controversial agenda, Menem was not reluctant to use the president's powers to issue emergency decrees. Formally, these are called necessity and urgency decrees, when the Congress was unable to reach consensus on his reforms proposed. Those powers were curtailed somewhat when the Constitution was reformed in '94, following the Pact of Olivos with the opposition Radical Party. That arrangement opened the way for Menem to seek and win re-election with 50% of the vote in a three-way 1995 presidential race. And the Piquetero movement rose. Now, the 1995 election saw the emergence of the moderate-left Free-Paso political alliance. This alternative to the two traditional political parties in Argentina was particularly strong in Buenos Aires, but lacked the national infrastructure of the Peronists and the Radicals. And by the way, either a Peronist party or a Radical party had ruled Argentina since about 1916, and except during the periods of military dictatorship. An important development in Argentina's political life, all three major parties in the '99 race espoused free market economic policies. In October '99, the UCR Frei Paso Alliance's presidential candidate was Fernando de la Rua. The defeated Peronist candidate was Eduardo Duhalde. Having taken office in December '99, de la Rua followed an IMF-sponsored program of government spending cuts, revenue increases, and provisional revenue sharing reforms to get the federal fiscal deficit under control, and pursued labor market flexibilization and business promotion measures aimed at stimulating foreign investment so as to avoid defaulting the public debt. 2 years later, however, toward the end of 2001, Argentina faced grave economic problems. The IMF pressed Argentina to service its external debt before anything else, effectively forcing Argentina to devalue the Argentine peso, which had been pegged to the US dollar, or alternatively, to fully dollarize the economy. Deep budget cuts, including a 13% reduction in pay for the nation's 2 million public sector employees, failed to curb the rapidly increasing country risk on almost US $100 billion in Argentine bonds, increasing debt service costs and further limiting access to international credit, despite a moderately successful debt swap arranged by Cavallo with most bondholders. That was the finance minister. Voters reacted to the rapidly worsening economy in the October 2001 midterm elections by both depriving the alliance of its majority in the lower house and by casting a record 25% of spoiled ballots. The Corralito in 2001 was a November 1st event that reflected that peoples were afraid that the peso would be devalued, and this caused massive withdrawal of bank deposits and capital flight. So De La Rua's Ministry of Economy, Domingo Cavallo, passed regulations severely limiting withdrawals, effectively freezing foreign accounts, post-peso denominated assets of the Argentine middle class, and all of this, by its very nature, he was trying to shield from devaluation, or the freezing of the bank accounts was informally called Corralito, the little corral. The overall economy declined drastically during December 2001. The resulting riots led to dozens of deaths. The Minister of Economy, Domingo Cavallo, resigned, but that did not prevent the collapse of De La Rua's administration, and on December 20th of 2001, De La Rua also resigned. But the political crisis was extremely serious as a result of the previous resignation of the Vice President, Carlos Chacho Alvarez, in 2000. So the President of the Senate became interim President until the National Congress could elect 2 days later somebody else to finish De La Rua's term, and that turned out to be Adolfo Rodriguez Sá. But Rodriguez Sá resigned a week later on December 31st, leaving the power to the Chamber of Deputies as the Senate was undergoing their annual renovation. So, what a mess. Finally, on January 2nd, 2002, the National Congress elected the Peronist Eduardo Duhalde, a losing candidate in the most recent presidential election, as President of Argentina. The peso was further devalued by 29%, and the dollar peg was abandoned by July of 2002. The national currency depreciated to 1/4 of its former value. Now, there was a recovery in 2002-03. President Duhalde faced a country in turmoil. His administration had to deal with a wave of protests from middle-class cacerolazos and unemployed piqueteros, and did so with a relatively tolerant policy intending to minimize violence. As inflation became a serious issue and the effects of the crisis became apparent in the form of increased unemployment and poverty, Duhalde chose a moderate, low-profile economist named Roberto Lavagna as his Minister of Economy. The economic measures implemented brought inflation under control, and after a year, Duhalde deemed his task fulfilled and, pressured by certain political factors, decided to call for new elections, which in April 2003 brought Nestor Kirchner, the left-of-center Peronist governor of Santa Cruz province, to power. Now we go through the Kirchner period, and this is of special interest because of what's happening today in Argentina. President Nestor Kirchner took office on May 25, 2003. He reshuffled the leadership of the armed forces, overturned the controversial amnesty laws that protected members of the 76 to 83 CIA fascist dictatorship from prosecution, and kept Lavagna on as economics minister for most of his presidency. The Kirchner administration saw a strong economic rebound and foreign debt restructuring. And in the 2007 general election that took place in 10 provinces in September, Kirchner's Front for Victory party won in 6 of those 10 provinces. Hermes Biner was elected governor of Santa Fe, becoming the first socialist governor in Argentina's history, and the first non-justicialist to rule. The rather wealthy Santa Fe province and center-left Fabiana Rios became the first woman to be elected governor of Tierra del Fuego, while the right-wing Mauricio Macri was elected chief of government of Buenos Aires City in June of 2007. Just to comment on this justicialist business, Juan Perón called his philosophy and his movement the justicialist movement, which the closest interpretation in English would be justice-ism. Now, the thesis behind of all of this that Perón put forward, trying to get it accepted by his own ruling class, was the idea that social justice requires that workers be given a bigger part of the value that they create, and not all of it appropriated by the owners of the factories and the big latifundias. Of course, the latter didn't like this justice idea very much at all. But at any rate, that's what justicialism or justicialismo means in political reality. Now, on December 10th, 2007, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner took over the presidency from her husband after winning the elections with 44% of the vote. Nestor Kirchner remained a highly influential politician during the term of Cristina Kirchner. The press developed the term presidential marriage to make reference to both of them at once, and some political analysts compared this type of government with a diarchy. After proposing a new taxation system for agricultural exports, Cristina Fernandez's government had to face a severe lockout of the sector. The protest, which spread over 129 days, was quickly politicized and marked an inflection point in her administration, and the system was finally rejected in the Senate by an opposing vote by the Vice President Julio Coles. The political style of the government changed with the death and state funeral of Nestor Kirchner. Cristina slowly distanced herself from the traditional structure of the Justicialist Party and favored instead La Campora, a group of young supporters led by her son Maximo Kirchner. Now, there was a return to conservatism, as you know, in 2015 that continues to the present day, when Mauricio Macri was elected president of Argentina. On the 22nd of November 2015, the Conservatives won the presidency of the country. Mauricio Macri, leader of the Conservative Party, Propuesta Republicano, was became president of the country with a liberal integrated alliance. It included Social Democrats and radicals. The alliance is called Cambiemos, overcoming the former Motonata Daniel Scioli from Front for Victory. Macri took over as president of the 10th of December of that year. You'll recall that the Peronista Kirchner party was called Front for Victory. Now, Macri's been in trouble ever since he got elected. And just to summarize for a few minutes, we'll go back over it in more detail soon. Macri's government is facing the strongest opposition to his term so far, as his neoliberal policies start to seriously affect Argentines' daily lives. Former businessman Macri cut energy subsidies and hiked power rates shortly after taking office, last December. With social movements preparing massive protests, the country's Supreme Court demanded that the government of Mauricio Macri justify within 10 days the social and economic aspects of the 400% rise in people's gas bills. The country's highest court was solicited by the federal court in La Plata, which decided to suspend all bill increases, saying the government failed to implement the required public audits before imposing the price hike in April of this year. Therefore, Macri's conservative government was forced to promise that the price would hopefully be maintained under 400% without being able to confirm it, and on the initiative of the opposition bloc, Justicialist Party Front for Victory, both chambers in Congress announced measures in order to supervise the government's controversial move. Senators approved a bill asking the government to suspend the rise of gas bills until the case brought to the Supreme Court was resolved, while representatives called a special session over the matter. Meanwhile, civil society also mobilized, with social organizations, consumers associates, and opposition groups organizing another massive political protest for calling a cacerolazo in order to reject Macri's policies. Macri said the decision, which raised tariffs by more than 1,000% in some places, still pains me. All transitions are hard, he said, in a speech where he marked the country's bicentennial Independence Day celebration. Let's learn to consume the least amount of energy possible, Macri said from the northern province of Tucumán, the cradle of Argentina's independence, touting the environmental benefits of reducing energy expenditures in your house. By sharply devaluating the peso by more than 25%, loosening price controls and hiking utility rates, Macri has set inflation surging. Prices have risen more than 6% in Buenos Aires this month alone. Private economists estimate putting basic living costs out of the reach for even more families. Therefore, nearly 33% of Argentines now are unable to afford the family basket and other basic goods, up from 29% at the end of last year, 2015, according to researchers at the Catholic University of Argentina. Argentine President Mauricio Macri's approval rating has plummeted accordingly since he first assumed office, according to a study released a few days ago, the most dramatic fall coming from lower income regions, which have most severely felt the consequences of his economic policy. In other words, those that disapproved of Macri most are those taking the brunt of his neoliberal economic policies. Macri has a 46% approval rating, which is a drop of about 18% from last month's approval rating, according to Poliarquía Consultores. Only 19% of the respondents have a positive view of Argentina's situation, compared to 42% that view it negatively, and two-thirds found President Macri responsible for this state of affairs. Macri polled the worst among respondents with a primary education. A quarter of respondents that previously supported Macri now do not approve of him, and in the northern and southern regions most highly affected by high inflation and a rise in the cost of public utilities, he is now more unpopular than before his election by far. The petroleros went on strike, that is the oil workers, demanding a raise of at least 42% to offset the rate of inflation, but neoliberal cap hitmen from Gringolandia have designed a policy for Macri and the country that has reached a wage-destroying inflationary goal, and they have made Macri follow this since he took office. Oil workers in Argentina, who are government employees, went on strike accordingly against the government of Macri. Effectively, they paralyzed work sites for 48 hours, and potentially they were cutting off the flow of gas to several provinces altogether. In an attempt to stop the strike, Macri proposed a 20 to 30% wage hike to take place in 3 increments. The Ministry of Labor said a few days later that the suggested salary increase would be of about $1,000 and spread over a 3-increment period, and this was far less than the neoliberal hitman imposed inflation and the workers rejected the offer and threatened to ramp up the strike. The strike so far has 100% compliance. No one is working at the oil deposits, said Salvador Caceres from the country's oil union, and the strike is currently affecting production of oil and gas in the country, especially in the provinces of Chubut, Neuquén, Rio Negro, Santa Cruz, Tierra del Fuego, La Pampa, Mendoza, and Salta. On the other hand, Juan Pablo Fantini, president of the state-owned oil company YPF, said they are capable of meeting the demands for continued supplies. The workers are still demanding a raise of at least 42%, which is the rate of inflation that the country has reached since neo-fascist President Macri took office. Guillermo Pereira, General Secretary of the Oil Union, said it was a provocation on behalf of the government to suggest a staggered salary increase of only 20%, and he said the union will continue to protest until they are given an increase that at least meets the rate of inflation. If the government fails to reach an agreement with the workers, the union said it would not rule out calling for a new 72-hour strike. Well, on July 16th of this year, which is just a few days ago, Prensa Latina reports that Argentine President Macri is in trouble because of a national protest on these gas rates, a recessive economy, inflation, and now complications with fiscal affidavits. Federal Judge Sebastián Casaleo asked on Friday that the prosecution of economic crimes and money laundering, PROCELAC, informs him on the alleged inconsistencies detected after comparing sworn declarations which Macri presented when he was a candidate and still the head of the government of the city of Buenos Aires. And this has to do with these Panama Papers accounts, which showed that he had these Bahamian offshore shell companies set up where he was a director, and that a lot of money had been deposited in them that he didn't manage to declare in his required financial disclosure statements prior to his election. At any rate, at the end of June, the magistrate asked the government of the capital and the Anti-Corruption Office, headed by former deputy and ally of President Laura Alonso. Ordered was a comparative study of the asset declaration presented by Macri from 2013 to 2015. Both petitions are part of the case in which Macri is accused of not having reported his participation in the enterprises offshore Flag Trading Limited and Kagemusha S.A.R. One of the outstanding elements is that since leaving the governorship of the capital in December until now, the president's personal wealth, as he has admitted, more than doubled from almost $3.5 million to $7.3 million. Another headache for the chief of the Casa Rosada, which is the name of their White House, is the passive protest generated by the drastic hikes in tariffs and public services, which are up to 2,200% in the case of gas, 700% electricity, they mean natural gas, and 350% more for the water service. In a visit to the U.S. last week, Macri said Argentinians incredibly understand the necessary rise in their gas bills, but at the same time he was talking, the Federal Chamber of La Plata suspended that raise in gas rates throughout the country. After other courts in different provinces also ruled for suspending these gas hikes, the executive went back and fixed the increase in 400% for the population and 500 to 600% for business clients. The government also appealed to the Supreme Court of Justice and even filed a demand against the verdict given by La Plata. Notwithstanding, people took to the streets Thursday night, and the Federal Chamber of La Plata ratified on Friday its decision against the tariff hike. As if this were not enough, a demonstration of taxi drivers on Friday afternoon, surrounded with cars, the Quinta de Olivos presidential residence claiming for a subsidy to face the hike of compressed natural gas, and that Uber is put out of circulation for robbing the market. Inflation is not showing any improvement, and in June it was 3.1%. according to official statistics, for an accumulated indicator of 44% since Macri took office, while economist Arnaldo Bocco predicts it will be 47% by the end of the year. Promised investments have not arrived. Some international lending institutions have made loans, which added to the sale of debt bonds, increased Argentine public debt over $27 billion to foreign banks. And the economy, judging from the fall in almost all manufacturing, made no headway. The gross domestic product is on target to fail by 2%. According to economist Arnaldo Bocco, the universe of the government's economic policies, like the reduction of agricultural subsidies and the devaluation of the peso, brought nasty consequences on food prices. To that is added that the deregulation of the markets, the opening of the economy, a high exchange rate, and the level of the interest rate had negative effects in the formation of prices of the business sector as it faces the rising fiscal cost. To all this was added a ruthless hike in service tariffs. The situation worsened even more because enterprises have a market with lower consumption capacity motivated by inflation. Salary adjustments are way below the inflation rate. Now, I have a section called Epilogue, it's Prologue. I began this lecture on the Empire Strikes Back against Argentina, pointing out that the future of the world is being decided right now in South America. Why is that so? Well, first of all, because the U.S. imperialists have been unsuccessful in their fundamental Wolfowitz-Kagan strategy of blocking and destroying Russia, Iran, and China. First of all, they failed miserably against Russia in the Baltics, in the Black Sea, and in the Ukraine. And secondly, they had to concede defeat in their long war against Iran. And thirdly, they are not getting anywhere with their attempt to seize the South China Sea from China. And their installation of their super missile system in Korea is being countered effectively by China and Russia. Nor is their attempt to use Japan as a surrogate working out, because Japan has not the military capability to do that job and is in a desperate economic situation only exacerbated by gringo imperialist demands. And second of all, they have been forced to renew their aggression against Latin America, not because they wanted to divert resources from their old world Wolfowitz-Kagan objectives, but because having failed in achieving those objectives, and thus they have no choice but to try and divert their military attention to their traditional backyard. Mexico they have under complete control, as well as Canada, and they have secured their traditional bases in Honduras and Panama. South America, on the other hand, has become relatively independent for the first time since its liberation from the yoke of Spanish colonial domination in the last 15 years. In Peru, they have secured the nation, even putting a U.S. citizen in as its president, along with a textbook crew of neoliberal hitmen for his cabinet. However, they have lost out in their attempt to overthrow the governments of Ecuador, Bolivia, Uruguay, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Despite the CIA's best efforts, they have lost their war against the masses of Colombia. So the tip of the CIA spear is directed against Brazil, with a collateral and strong offensive against Argentina, using their base in Paraguay to assist against both of these countries. And it's Argentina that's the subject of today's lecture 43B. But, in summary, in 1942, the future of the world was decided in Stalingrad in 1942. Now today in 2016, the future of the world is being decided in South America. Finally, it is worthy of note that as the Nazis had to be fought on many fronts, simultaneously with the prime focus on the Stalingrad front, today mankind's deadliest enemy, U.S. imperialism, has also to be fought on many fronts. Among these are the sedition fronts and the intelligence war. For example, the imperialists have had limited success in attacking Russia via the back door of A, the CIA masterminded attack on Russian participation in world sporting events, and B, the CIA attack against the RIA Novosti new Russian information service, where their Trotskyite covert agent Brian Becker and his PSL gang have taken control of the English page of Sputnik. Some of you will recall that Sam Webb has been exposed for what he is, namely a career FBI special agent tasked with taking over the CPUSA. He did that, but without revisionist support from Moscow, the remnants of a once great party are simply an embarrassing historical anachronism. On the other hand, the CIA has had more luck against Russia with Becker and his gang. First, they had to break Becker and his PSL gang out of their home party, Workers' World. PSL, by the way, stands for Party of Socialism and Liberation. They did this, and then as Becker wrested control of the Answer Coalition away from Workers' World, in that split, PSL went a separate path, trying to pretend that they were a real communist party. Now, all one has to do is to go to their meetings or bookstores to see that they are really just a traditional Trotskyite party, camouflaging themselves as best they can by claiming to be Marxist-Leninists. Real Marxist-Leninists would not be flaunting the counter-revolutionary Trotskyist literature at every opportunity. Those of you who have been reading this textbook and watching these accompanying lectures know that I've had considerable experience fighting the CIA in the real world for many decades in many countries. Therefore, when I tell you what Becker is, you have good reason to consider this. However, this is not the answer. You have to master the fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism, meaning the fundamentals of materialism and its dialectical engine of transformation. When you do this, then you do not have to rely on any one person or groups of people, because you become the knowledgeable agent of change and direction of change. Your education along these lines is the purpose of this textbook and the accompanying lecture series. Ironically for me, the most important work that set me on this course was that of a Trotskyist named Raya Dunayevskaya. She founded a group called News and Letters out of Chicago. That group has not been able to grow because its members, her followers, do not understand their own philosophy and are bogged down in the manipulation of philosophical categories. The most important one being negation of the negation. Now, in the very first lecture in this series, and in the initial chapters of your textbook, I put this discussion of how things transform into their opposites in real-world terms. We have the evidence from the four subdisciplines of anthropology, especially archaeology and cultural anthropology. The most important single question to be answered is, how and why did humanity leave the egalitarian altruism of primitive communism in which it evolved and lived for millions of years, into its opposite, the selfishness and sadism of the servitude epoch? This requires the study of the evidence of the real world provided by archaeology and cultural anthropology, as well as anthropological linguistics and physical anthropology. And I have provided you with a detailed explication of the dialectical method in the study of the real world categories of materialism. Marxism-Leninism is a science, and if you master what is in your textbook through hard study, memorization, and more study and memorization, then you will be truly free. You will not be susceptible to enemy agents that come in the form of syndicalists, anarchists, modern revisionists, or Trotskyists. You can direct your own individual destinies in the great task before humanity today, namely bringing about the emergence of a communist society based on the ongoing complete construction of Star Trek technology and social relations, and with this, the exploration and conquest of the galaxy. Now, let's do a detailed examination of the Kirchners. Nestor Carlos Kirchner was born on the 25th of February 1950 and died on October 27, 2010. As you know, he was an Argentine politician who served as president from Argentina from the 25th of May 2003 until the 10th of December 2007. Previously, he had been governor of Argentina's Santa Cruz province from the 10th of December of 91, and he briefly served as Secretary General of the Union of South American Nations, UNASUR, and as Deputy Peronist, as National Peronist Deputy of Argentina for Buenos Aires province. Kirchner's four-year presidency was notable for presiding over a dramatic fall in poverty and unemployment following the economic crisis that had begun in 2001. That crisis, caused most importantly by the CIA's sabotage of Argentina's attempts to handle its U.S.-imposed IMF, World Bank, etc. foreign debt. A Peron justicialist, Kirchner was unknown internationally and little known domestically before his election to the presidency. an election he initially won with only 22.2% of the vote in the first round, because former President Carlos Menem, who had 24.4%, withdrew from the contest after the election. Soon after Kirchner took office in May 2003, he surprised everyone by standing down powerful military and police officials. He insisted on accountability for crimes against humanity that had happened under the CIA military government. The criminals were arrested and tried, and along the way, Kirchner had to overturn the amnesty laws for military officers accused of torture and assassinations during the 1976 to 1983 Dirty War under military rule. Then, on 28th of October 2007, his wife, Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, was elected to succeed him as president of Argentina. In 2008, during a government conflict with the agricultural sector, Nestor Kirchner became the president of Perón's Justicialist Party. In 2009, he was elected a National Peronist deputy for Buenos Aires province, and he became Secretary General of the Union of South American Nations on the 4th of May 2010. Nestor Kirchner was operated on twice in 2010 for cardiovascular problems and died at his home in El Calafate, Santa Cruz province on 27th of October 2010 of a heart attack. For more than 24 hours, hundreds of thousands of people filed past Kirchner's body lying in state. There was also a state funeral at the Casa Rosada, that's in their White House in Buenos Aires, attended by several Argentine personalities and 8 South American leaders. On the afternoon of 29 October, a funeral procession accompanied Kirchner's body from Casa Rosada to the Metropolitan Airport, and then from the airport of Rio Gallegos to the cemetery where he was buried. Nothing like it had happened since the death of Eva Perón and her funeral procession. Now, as to Kirchner's political history, he moved to La Plata in '69 to study law at the National University of La Plata. There were passionate political controversies at the time caused by the decline of the Argentine Revolution military government, and the return of the former President Juan Perón from exile, the election of Héctor Cámpora as President of Argentina, and the early stages of the Dirty War. Nestor Kirchner joined the University Federation for the National Revolution, FURN, F-U-R-N, a political student union. FURN had sympathy and links with the Montoneros guerrilla fighters. Nestor Kirchner was present at the CIA's Ezeiza Airport massacre, and he had seen the expulsion of the Montoneros from the Plaza de Mayo. Now, by this time, Kirchner had met Cristina Fernandez, 3 years younger than he. The political turmoil made their romance short, only 6 months before they got married. There was a civil wedding, and Kirchner's friends sang Los Muchachos Peronistas, the Peronista boys, a Peronist hymn at the wedding reception. Nestor Kirchner graduated a year later and returned to Patagonia with his wife Cristina. The Kirchners established a law firm with fellow lawyer Domingo Ortiz de Zarate. Cristina Fernandez joined the firm officially in '79, and along the way the Kirchners acquired 21 land lots among those at auction. Now, the national reorganization process of the Dirty War junta eventually allowed political activities, and Nestor Kirchner created the Ateneo Juan Domingo Perón organization, which supported the overthrown President Isabel Martínez de Perón and promoted political dialogues with the military coups. Then Raúl Alfonso ran for Argentina's presidency for the Radical Civic Union, UCR, and the Kirchners supported instead Rodolfo Ponce, a union leader. Alfonsín won the '83 presidential elections, as we have seen, but the Peronist Arturo Puricelli was elected governor of Santa Cruz province. Puricelli appointed Kirchner president of the Santa Cruz Province Social Welfare Fund. Kirchner won wide support for his progressive policies in this capacity, and when the time came in 1991, he ran for and was elected governor of Santa Cruz Province. Again, he won praise from the masses and their unions. Now, in the 2003 presidential election, all the Peronist candidates were allowed to run in the main election, using political parties created for the event. Kirchner ran for the presidency with the support of Eduardo Duhalde, and Kirchner became president on May 25, 2003, with 22.2%, the lowest vote share ever recorded for an Argentine president in a free election. The elections at other districts were held in October. The mayor of Buenos Aires, Aníbal Ibarra, was reelected in a runoff election against Mauricio Macri. Neither of them were Peronists, but Ibarra had voiced his support for Kirchner, and Macri was supported by Dualde. Dualde proved to be still an influential figure in the Buenos Aires province. Felipe Solá, aligned to him, was the elected governor by a landslide. However, the Perón Justicialist Party got the highest number of deputies in the National Assembly since 1983 and won the mayoral elections of several big cities that had earlier been lost to the UCR, the Radical Union Party, in 1999. The three leading candidates in the Buenos Aires province were all Peronistas. The victories at the other provinces gave the PJ, the Peronismo Justicialist Party, the full control of the Congress. 3/4 of the provincial governors were Peronists as well. So, when Nestor Kirchner took office as president of Argentina in May 25, 2003, he had strong national support in Congress and in the governorships. Contrary to tradition, the ceremony was held at the Palace of the Argentine National Congress and not the Casa Rosada, and he announced that he would change many things from politics to culture. The provincial governors attended the ceremony, and of course most of them were Peronistas, as did the President of the Supreme Court, Julio Nazareno, the chiefs of the armed forces, and the head of state of Cuba, Fidel Castro. Now, you know, whenever Fidel Castro goes to somebody's inauguration, that means that Cuba and the Cuban Revolution are supporting him. He was the most important attendee that day, you can be sure. Now, as for the economic policies of Nestor Kirchner, they kept up the Minister of Economy during most of his term, Roberto Lavagna, as well as Lavagna's main policies. The main pillars of the economic plan were a trade and fiscal budget surplus and a high exchange rate for the dollar. Kirchner sought to rebuild the Argentine industrial base, public works, and public services, and he also sought to renegotiate the operation of public services privatized by Carlos Menem and owned by foreign companies. Kirchner and Lavagna negotiated a swap of defaulted debt in 2005. It was a write-down to just 1/3 of the original debt, and he also refused to work on any structural adjustment program and paid the whole debt to the IMF in a single payment using the central bank reserves. This payment ended the Argentine default with the IMF. It also saved Argentina an incredible amount of money, and the economy grew for an annual 8% during Kirchner's term. However, of course, foreign investment remained low because of the hostility toward the IMF, the U.S., and the United Kingdom, and the renationalization of privatized companies such as the water supply company. Lavagna proposed to slow economic growth and to control the growing inflation. Kirchner rejected all of this and promoted wage boosts to reduce economic inequality. He also extended the use of unemployment insurance and other forms of social welfare. All of this was hated by the Gringo regime and its ruling oligarch owners. Lavagna refused to be a candidate in the 2005 midterm elections and criticized the overpricing of public works managed by Devido. Consequently, Kirchner asked him to resign. The finance secretary, Guillermo Nielsen, who managed the debt restructuring, resigned as well. Felisa Miceli, head of Banco de la Nación, the National Bank of Argentina, was appointed minister to replace Lavagna, and Miceli resigned in 2007, months before the presidential elections, because of a scandal over a bag of money, with a big bag with a huge amount of money found in her office bathroom. The industry secretary, Miguel Gustavo Petrano, took over for the remainder of Kirchner's term, replaced her. At any rate, I don't know what the poor girl was keeping her money in her bathroom for, but, well, at any rate, I've seen dumber things, I guess. Nestor Kirchner took a pragmatic approach toward the Argentine foreign policy. The Argentina-U.S. relations did not continue the automatic alignment, however, held in the 1990s, and the CIA was given the task of covertly subverting Kirchner's government. The Chancellor, Rafael Bielsa, referred to the foreign policy as, quote, cooperation without cohabitation, unquote, with the United States, in contrast to the relations of the Menem area, which were known as, quote, carnal relations, unquote. Kirchner opposed the Free Trade Area of the Americas, the FTAA. In the fourth Summit of the Americas hosted in Mar de la Plata ended with violent protests against George W. Bush. Some of you may recall that they were organized by our friend Hugo Chavez out of Venezuela. The negotiations stalled and the FTAA was never implemented, and Bush was effectively run out of the country on a rail. Kirchner mentioned in the UN that although he formally opposed terrorism, he did not support the war on terror, and he sent U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld packing when he tried to visit Buenos Aires. Argentina sent forces to the United Nations Stabilization Mission in Haiti, however. Now, Kirchner sought an increased integration with other Latin American countries. He relaunched the Mercosur, sought to add new countries to it, and improved the relations with Brazil. Kirchner tried to stay in a middle ground between Brazil and Venezuela. He considered Luis Inácio Lula da Silva too conservative, and he worked both with the center-left rulers Lula and the Chilean Ricardo Lagos, and with the left-wing ruler Chavez, the Cuban Fidel Castro, and the Bolivian Evo Morales. Now, in the 2005 midterm elections, Kirchner sought support from the anti-imperialist, social, and political spectra to counter the influence of Duhalde within the Justicialist Party. However, both of them delayed an open dispute and stuck together during the 2003 legislative elections held in October. The dispute was influenced by the political weight of Buenos Aires province, the most populated district in Argentina, with almost 40% of the nation's voters. And this dispute continued into the 2005 midterm elections. Without consensus in the PJ, the Justicialist Party, for a single candidate for senator of the Buenos Aires province, both leaders had their respective wives run for office. Hilda González de Duhalde for the PJ, and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner for the Front for Victory. That's the Peronist Party. So, the wives of the Justicialist candidate and the Peronist candidate ran instead of the men themselves, and in that election Cristina won. As in the 2003, the elections were defined within Peronist factions, because the PJ is a Peronist party, as is the Front for Victory. One is right-wing and the other is left-wing. The opposition parties were scattered and could not provide a national united front. Accordingly, the CIA went to work to build a unity movement party to back Mauricio Macri, their candidate. When the time came, they would have him and it. Ending the CIA's crime against humanity. Kirchner said the 1970s dirty war was still going on, just in a different way. In his inaugural address, he supported the human rights organizations which sought the trial and incarceration of the military men of the National Reorganization Process. That was what they called, that's what the junta called their government. He sent a bill to the Congress to repeal the full stop law and the law of due obedience, which had halted the trials of the military over crimes related to the dirty war. Duhalde and Scioli resisted this project under orders from the CIA that hoped to resurrect the junta, or at least another junta. Both amnesty laws were repealed in Congress, however, on August 2003, and many new cases against Army officers were reopened. The Supreme Court declared the laws unconstitutional, and in 2005 as well, the presidential pardons issued by Menem. So now these guys were rearrested. The Mason Jorge Julio Lopez, witness in a trial against the CIA killer cop police officer Miguel Echecolatz, was disappeared in 2006 by a kidnapping murdering team, CIA kidnapping murdering team. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo made a demonstration in 2006 supporting Kirchner. They became political allies of the Kirchners, who included them in prominent locations during his and her later speeches. Generous financing allowed the mothers and grandmothers to reach a global audience and turn the group into a powerful NGO. The Gringo regime on the Potomac, however, was angered that Kitchener did not hold a similar repudiation for the guerrilla movements of the time. His government ignored the anniversaries of the terrorist attacks of the left-wingers against, such as the 30th anniversary of the ERP terrorist attack on the tank regiment of Azul, the 15th anniversary of the 1989 attack on La Tablada barracks, the guerrillas that committed suicide with suicide pills or who were executed by their own organizations were recategorized in 2006 as victims of state terrorism, and their relatives received huge state compensations. Nestor Kirchner died on October 27, 2010 at the age of 60. He suffered a cardiac arrest and was rushed to a local hospital where he was pronounced dead at 9:15 a.m. He had undergone 2 heart procedures earlier that year, one on his right carotid artery in February and an angioplasty in September. The corpse of Kirchner was flown to the Casa Rosada for a state funeral. 3 national days of mourning were declared for the event. It was attended by hundreds of thousands of people despite heavy rain, and the media reported that 1,000 people per hour entered the Casa Rosada. Christina Kirchner in mourning clothes, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, stood next to the coffin. The people brought candles, flags, and flowers, and Christina took some of those personally. His death caused international reaction within a few minutes of its announcement. Brazil and Venezuela declared 3 national days of mourning. Juan Manuel Santos, president of Colombia, declared a minute of silence, as did the Organization of American States. Barack Obama from the U.S. sent his condolences, and the state funeral was attended by Chavez and Lula da Silva, among others. Now we come to the presidency of Christina Kirchner. She was born on the 19th of February 1953, known as Christina Kirchner and often referred to in the press by her initials CFK. She's an Argentine lawyer and a politician, and still very much alive. And of course she was the wife of the deceased president, Nestor Kirchner. She was president of Argentina from 2007 to 2015, a member of the Justicialist Party. Fernandez served 1 term as Peronist National Deputy and 3 terms as Peronist National Senator for both Santa Cruz and Buenos Aires provinces. Born in La Plata, Buenos Aires province, Christina is a law school graduate of the National University of La Plata. She met her husband during her studies, and they moved together to Santa Cruz to work as lawyers. In May '91, she was elected to the provincial legislature between 1995 and 2007. She was repeatedly elected to the Argentine National Congress, both as a national deputy and a national senator. In 2007, she was chosen by the Front for Victory Peronist Party as its presidential candidate. She obtained 45.3% of the vote and a 22% lead over her nearest rival in 2007, and was inaugurated on the 10th of December that year, re-elected to a 2nd term in the first round of the October 2011 general election with 54.1% of the votes. She was 37.3% points over the next candidate, Ernest Benner. The election of the right-wing politician and capitalist Mauricio Macri in November 2015 as president of Argentina meant that the first time the non-radical union or Peronist had been elected in a free election in Argentina in a century. The Gringo CIA, tasked with destroying Kirchnerism, hoped that election would bring an end to the Kirchnerismo movement. Nevertheless, Kirchnerismo's popularity remained strong, as does Christina Kirchner herself. Now, she was born, as I said, on February 19, 1953, in Tolosa, a suburb west of La Plata, Buenos Aires province, as the daughter of Eduardo Fernandez, a bus driver, and Ofelia Esther Wilhelm. Her 4 grandparents were born in Europe. 3 in northern Spain, specifically Galicia and Asturias, and 1 in Germany. She studied law at the National University of La Plata during the 1970s and became active in the Peronist youth movement. She registered at the Tribunal Superior de Justicia of Santa Cruz in 1980, meaning she registered as a lawyer there. That's how you would do it. Comodoro Rivadavia's Chamber of Appeals in 1985, another place where you would have to get certified to practice, and worked as an attorney for the PJ in 1983, the Justicialist Party. Along with former President and husband Nestor Kirchner, Cristina sympathized with the Peronist youth movement during her university studies. However, the two never joined the Montoneros, nor engaged in any notable political activism during that time, which is undoubtedly why they did not get murdered. When the CIA and military junta in the 1976 Argentina coup occurred and overthrew Isabel Perón, the Kirchners left La Plata for Rio Gallegos and worked as lawyers, and she began her political career in the late 1980s, elected to the Santa Cruz Provincial Legislature in 1989 and re-elected there in 93. In 95, Cristina was elected to represent Santa Cruz in the Senate, and she was elected to the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house, in 97 and returned to the Senate in 2001. In the first round of the presidential election on 27 April 2003, former President Carlos Saúl Menem won the greatest number of votes, but failed to win an overall majority. A second round runoff between Menem and Nestor Kirchner was scheduled for 18th of May. However, the polls showed that Kirchner would certainly win, so Menem pulled himself out of the runoff, and this automatically made Kirchner president, even though in the election he'd only had 22% of the vote. That's how that happened. It's a matter of interest I thought you might like to know. Well, as we would soon see, however, the vote he got was quite enough to get him started and on the path to being Argentina's most popular president since Juan Perón. Evita reincarnated. During her husband's term, Cristina worked as an itinerant ambassador for his government. Her highly combative speech style polarized Argentine politics, recalling the style of Eva Perón. Cristina once said in an interview that she identified herself with the Evita of the hair in a bun and the clenched fist before a microphone. I meant to bring a picture of Evita, the picture that was used all the time, her official portrait, but I forgot. At any rate, at the October 2005 legislative election, Cristina Kirchner was her party's main candidate for senator from the province of Buenos Aires. She ran a heated campaign against Hilda González de Duhalde. As I pointed out before, these two are the wives of the sitting president, Nestor Kirchner, and former president, Eduardo Duhalde. It was a perfect match between the new Evita and the old ruling class. Cristina won the election decisively in the first round with just over 45% of the vote, followed by 23% for Elisa Carrillo and 17% for former economy minister Roberto Lavagna. Kirchner was popular among the suburban working class and rural poor, while Carrillo and Lavagna both received more support from the urban bourgeoisie class. However, she did lose in the large cities of Buenos Aires and Rosario. She became president in 2007 on the 14th of November, and as president-elect she announced the names of her new cabinet. Of the 12 ministers appointed, 7 had been ministers in her husband's government, while the other 5 took office for the first time. The elections clearly meant a continuation of the policies implemented by Nestor Kirchner, and she began her first 4-year term on the 10th of December 2007. She faced challenges including inflation, poor public security, international credibility, a faulty energy infrastructure, and protests from the big agribusiness sectors over an increase of nearly 30% on export taxes. Nestor Kirchner stayed active in politics and worked alongside his wife Cristina, and the press developed the term presidential marriage. On the 29th of October 2009, she launched Asignación Universal por Hijo, a comprehensive child benefit program encompassing 5 million young people. The program was successful, increasing school attendance and reducing family poverty. So, in the 2011 presidential campaign, Cristina announced she would run for a second term as president with her economics minister, Amado Boudou, for vice president. She chose most of the candidates for the congressional deputy races, and on October 23, 2011, she was re-elected by 50% of the vote, which was more than enough to avoid a runoff. Her closest rival was 37 points behind her, and despite the CIA's best effort at sabotaging the economy, prosperity had prevailed. Her economic success gave her the highest victory in national elections since 1983. Her Peronist party won 8 of the 9 gubernatorial elections that day. They increased their number of senators and got a majority in the Chamber of Deputies. And she invited youngsters onto the stage during the celebration, and her vice president, Amado Boudou, played the electric guitar. She gave a gracious speech calling for the opposition to support the people's decisions. In 2010 began with the conservative attack on her order that a $6.7 billion escrow account be opened at the central bank for retiring high-interest bonds whose principal is tied to inflation. Now, this is not something that the bondholders wanted, and they opposed it because they wanted to get a maximum payment on the principal pegged to the inflation rate and have it extended over a period of time. Central Bank President Martin Redrado refused to implement the order. Accordingly, he was dismissed by presidential decree on the 7th of January 2010. The CIA began a covert campaign at that moment to support the bondholders. Redrado refused to abide by the initial decree removing him from the presidency of the central bank and petitioned for a court order to keep him in office. The president, Cristina, enacted another decree for his dismissal, citing misconduct on Redrado's part. Congress was in recess, however. Opposition members considered returning to override the decrees through an extraordinary session. Kirchner responded that Article 63 of the Constitution held that only the President could call for an extraordinary session while the Congress was in recess, and her enemies replied that all regulations concerning decrees require the immediate advice and consent of the Congress, and further, that Congress bylaws numbers 56 and 57 allow extraordinary sessions to be called by any member, and that the commission formed for that purpose functions at all times, even during recess. Now, the second big issue was, and the biggest one, was the vulture funds. That is, these guys that held out from the 2005 debt restructuring resorted to in the U.S. courts. That is, they resorted in the U.S. courts in a bid for higher returns on their defaulted bonds, getting a judgment lien on the 12th of January 2010 against an Argentine central bank account in New York. In other words, Argentina had an account in New York, as many governments do, for purposes of paying bills, and these New York judges are infamously corrupt, so this guy was no different. And Argentine Judge Sarmiento annulled the decree that removed Redrado and reinstated him in Buenos Aires as president of the central bank on the day following the decision where they bribed this U.S. court judge in New York. Now, the U.S. CIA used their international cap media to describe the attempted removal of Redrado as quote-unquote authoritarian. They said his planned use of reserves for debt retirement was illegal, and they attacked his social spending as physically irresponsible. The opposition congresswoman they put forward, that was named Elisa Carrillo, she had been a candidate in the 2011 presidential campaign, and she raised the possibility of impeachment procedures against Cristina Kirchner. CIA bribes brought about 2 resignations from Cristina's government in the next 2 weeks. However, in June of 2010, her administration completed the debt swap, clearing 92% of the bad debt left from its sovereign default of 2001. Argentina's external debt now represented 30% of the country's GDP. The central bank foreign reserves reached US $49 billion, sufficient to pay the foreign debt. Also in June 2010, she gave a speech at the International Trade Union Confederation Global Summit held in Vancouver, Canada. There she pointed out that many Eurozone countries today have applied the same policies that led Argentina to disaster in 2001. Her position was that, quote, it's an inescapable responsibility of the government to intervene in the financial system, unquote, under these collusive circumstances. Cristina went to Asia for the G20 Seoul Summit. Upon her return, she announced that the Paris Club had agreed in to debt talks without International Monetary Fund having to oversee them, and something demanded by Argentina since 2008. So these negotiations settled the last portion of the sovereign debt crisis of 2001 that remained after the restructuring of debts in 2005 and 2009. And in November, she took part in the UNICEF Summit in Guyana, Georgetown, followed by hosting the 20th Ibero-American Summit at Mar del Plata. In 2012, Cristina tightened currency controls, allowing access to other currencies to only those people who traveled outside the country, and this led to a black currency market. Now, on the 15th of May, the governor of Buenos Aires province, Daniel Scioli, voiced his intention to run for the presidency in 2015, and on July 11th, Cristina criticized the administration of Buenos Aires province because the provincial government didn't have money to pay their workers' wages. On the 20th of July, the federal government agreed to transfer funds to the province, and a similar pattern occurred with Mauricio Macri by his refusal to mediate in a subway strike that lasted for 10 days, generating huge traffic delays in Buenos Aires. Cristina realized she was walking into a trap that had been carefully designed, and she backed off. As part of her 2006 civilian nuclear power reactivation program, Cristina reopened the Pilsaniu uranium enrichment plant put on hold in the 90s due to shortages of natural gas, and then she called for the nationalization of the YPF oil company. In March 2008, she introduced a new sliding scale taxation system for agricultural exports, effectively raising taxes on soybean exports from 35% to 44%. This led to a nationwide lockout by agribusiness starting on 20 March with the aim of forcing the government to back down on this new taxation system. The CIA launched one of its color revolution precedent events on the 25th of March with thousands of pot-banging demonstrators massed around the Buenos Aires obelisk and in front of the presidential palace. As the CIA covert plan unfolded, protests extended across the country. In Buenos Aires, there were violent incidents between government supporters and opponents. When Cristina fought back, the cap media was harshly critical, claiming she and her followers had unfairly disrupted the protest. And on April 1st, a government-organized demonstration by thousands of pro-government protesters occurred downtown Buenos Aires against those supporting the agribusiness side in the fight over the tax bill. And what we're talking about with agribusiness are huge U.S.-style agricultural corporations that, of course, they want to keep their taxes as low as they can. However, on 16 July 2008, the Cristina-sponsored bill was defeated by the tie-breaking negative vote of one man, Vice President Julio Cobos. This controversy cost the Front for Victory 16 congressmen and 4 senators by way of defection, and the CIA had achieved its objective of wounding Cristina and her government. One poll result published in El País, Spain's most widely circulated daily newspaper, claimed that following the protests, Cristina's approval rating had plummeted from 58% at the start of her administration to an unprecedented 23%. And even allowing for the biased, fabricated figures, it was true that her popularity had for the first time taken a reversal. However, she soon recovered her popularity and her job approval ratings rose to 53%. So that on 20th of October 2008, Cristina proposed a transfer of nearly $30 billion in private pension holdings to the Social Security system, Her recovered party majority in Congress passed the law in late November 2008, and the foiling of Wile E. Coyote's CIA again infuriated them. The obstreperous canine went back to the Acme drawing board. New plots hatched. In 2012, labor leader and Secretary General of the Peronist CGT Union, Hugo Bolgano, organized a protest at Plaza de Mayo. 30,000 people requested the abolition of the capital gains tax on small and medium business. Christina could hardly say no and found herself in a difficult situation. Throughout the year, the Cap Press attacked Christina's liberation of prisoners sentenced for participating in government-supported demonstrations. More than 200,000 people in many cities of the country took part in a new CIA Color Revolution President event against Christina in September 2012. The CIA bought off the generals in charge of the police, and another demonstration against her was organized by the gendarmerie, and still another by the CTA, which is a transport union. The largest demonstration took place on 8 November 2012. And then we had the media wars. There were two media groups at war with each other. The first was the Peronist press that of course supported Christina. On the other hand, the anti-Peronists published Clarín, C-L-A-R-I-N, the largest selling newspaper in the country that opposed her at every turn. The government tried to enforce a competition media law that would force Clarín to sell most of the assets and lose licenses. Clarín launched a constitutional challenge on some articles of the law at the judiciary, and the government released an advertisement against Clarín claiming that they refused to obey the law and that they may be subverting democracy. The conflict was in actuality a typical CIA provocation. Whenever a popular government tries to get equal time with the Cap Press, Christina asserted that journalistic objectivity does not exist independent of class interests, and that all journalists act on behalf of certain interests, which of course is common knowledge. Anthony Mills, acting on behalf of the CIA in his capacity as deputy director of the International Press Institute, compared the harassment against the Cap Press in Argentina with the cases of Venezuela and Ecuador. This of course was true, as in both those countries the progressive government has been fighting for equal time with the subversive Cap Press in league with U.S. imperialism. So, in the 2009 midterm elections, the ruling FPV's party, Front for Victory list, lost its absolute majority in both houses of Congress, shedding a further 24 seats in the lower house and 4 in the Senate. The FVP lost in the 4 more important electoral districts, home to 60% of Argentines, and among these the loss was narrow only in Buenos Aires province. However, the FPV obtained a very narrow victory overall as a percentage of the national vote and retained their plurality in Congress. These off-year elections often feature opposition just doing well compared to the incumbents, and this is true in Argentina as well as in countries like the USA. Now, in the 2013 midterm elections, the Front for Victory had plans for a new election of Cristina Kirchner in 2015. This would require an amendment to the Constitution of Argentina, although the Front for Victory had the majority in both houses of the Congress since 2011. It did not have the supermajority required for such a constitutional amendment. Sergio Massa, mayor of Tigre, and a former chief of cabinet of Cristina Kirchner, was the main opposition figure. Argentina had not had a big opposition party since the collapse of the Radical Civic Union in 2001, so Massa created instead an alternative Peronist party. Cristina at the United Nations said that the Islamic State was trying to kill her in a conspiracy led by the United States. In her speech, she accused the vulture funds of destabilizing the economy of the countries and called them economic terrorists, and this was a declaration of war against U.S. imperialism. Argentina had not seen anything like this since the days of Juan Perón and Eva Duarte. In March 2010, Cristina made a historic trip to Peru to make amends. We could go through that, the rest of that, for quite a bit. The essence of this is that she had a pretty successful term, but she was consistently opposed at every point by the CIA and its front men. They had a plan in mind, and that was to elect a man named Mauricio Macri as president. And we've talked about him before with regard to Buenos Aires province. He himself was born on the 8th of February in Tandil, Buenos Aires province, as the son of Francesco Macri, a prominent upper bourgeois Italian capitalist in the industrial and construction business, and Alicia Blanco Villegas, a Spanish woman. Mauricio Macri is a graduate of the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, studied at the Columbia Business School in New York, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and the local Universidad del Sema. Macri won the presidential runoff in 2015, and he was where he had previously been the head of government of the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, as we've seen, from 2007 to 2015, and he represented the city of Buenos Aires in the lower house of Argentina from 2005 to 2007. He became best known because he was president of the Boca Juniors, one of the two most popular football clubs, by which they mean soccer, in the country. In 2005, he created the center-right electoral front Republican Proposal, Propuesta Republicana, also known as PRO, or PRO. And on the 22nd of November 2015, after a tie in the first round of presidential elections in October, he obtained 51+% of the votes and defeated the Peronist Front for Victory candidate, Daniel Scioli. Macri was inaugurated on the 10th of December 2015 in the National Congress of Argentina. He had started out in business with his father's construction company, Sideco, S-I-D-E-C-O, Americana, S-A-R. Sideco belonged to his father's holding company, the Socma Group, where he worked for 3 years as a junior analyst, eventually becoming a senior analyst. In 1984, he worked in the credit department of Citibank Argentina in Buenos Aires, and he joined his father's company, Socma, the holding company, the same year, and from 1995 onward, it was Socma, he was Socma's general manager. In 1992, he became the vice president of Sebel, Argentina, then manufacturing Fiat and Peugeot automobiles under license in Argentina and part of Socma. That company was part of Socma. So he became president in 94, and in short, Mauricio Macri is a bona fide big bourgeois by pedigree and class opportunity. In 1991, he was kidnapped for 12 days by officers of the Argentine Federal Police. He was kept inside a very small room with a chemical bathroom and a hole in the roof to receive food. He was freed after his family reportedly paid a multi-million-dollar ransom, and he has since said that that was the ordeal that made him decide to enter politics. I guess it's what you might call a life-changing experience. He gained recognition as president of one of Argentina's most popular football clubs, the Boca Juniors. He was elected in 1995 and re-elected in 1999 and 2003 to complete one of the most successful periods of the Boca Juniors club, winning 7 national tournaments and 11 international competitions. And he married fellow capitalist Juliana Awala in 2010. In 2003, Macri made his political debut when he founded the center-right party, CPC, Compromiso para el Cambio, Commitment to Change, and later that year he ran for mayor of the city of Buenos Aires for the CPC, and he won the first round of the election with 34%, but lost the runoff election with 40% to a man named Anibal Ibarra. In 2005, he joined Ricardo Lopez Murphy of Recrear to create a center-right electoral front called Propuesta Republicana, PRO. He won in the city of Buenos Aires for the Chamber of Deputies. In 2007, Macri was in discussions with right conservative Jorge Sobisch, governor of Neuquén province, about supporting him in the 2007 national elections. However, this agreement was in conflict with the previous alliance with Ricardo Lopez Murphy, who had decided to run for the presidency. And furthermore, Lopez Murphy was in a pissing contest with Jorge Sobis. Later that year, Sobis was accused of killing the school teacher Carlos Fuente Alba during a union demonstration in Neuquén. Macri dropped negotiations with Sobis and stayed out of the national elections of 2007. So, in February 2007, Macri announced that he would run again for mayor of the city of Buenos Aires. He ran with Gabriela Michetti as his number 2 on the PRO ticket. In the first round of the election on the 2nd of June 2007, he won with 45.6% of the vote over the Peronist candidate Daniel Filmus. And in the runoff between Macri and Filmus on 24th of June, Macri won with 61% of the vote. Macri's victory turned the mayor-elect into the leader of the center-right opposition, and the Front for Victory also lost in Tierra del Fuego that same day. Mauricio Macri made an alliance for the 2009 elections with Francisco de Narvaez and Felipe Solá. The alliance was successful as de Narvaez won in Buenos Aires province, and Gabriel Michetti, Macri's candidate, won the elections in the city of Buenos Aires. Macri was thus the likely rightist candidate to dispute the presidency in 2011 elections. However, as the 2011 electoral season began, Cristina's job approval was 58%, and all polls indicated she would be re-elected in the first round. So instead of running for the presidency, he ran for re-election as mayor. And he won the first round of the election on 10 July 2011, and the runoff against Filmus again on 31 July. With over 64% of the votes. Now, this is probably the most important thing to remember about why Macri was successful a few months ago, and that is, he is an intelligent man and he's capable of learning from his enemies. He had seen that the Peronistas were successful because they delivered things the people wanted. Accordingly, Macri's administration in Buenos Aires went to work to reduce heavy traffic, introducing, among other things, the Metrobus bus rapid transit system. Now, the main avenues of Buenos Aires suddenly became convenient and easily passable. By the end of Macri's term as mayor, the system had 5 lines at 113 stations and was over 31 miles in length. Other streets had bikeways to promote the use of bicycles, and the city created the Ecobici bicycle sharing scheme. By the end of Macri's tenure, some 96 miles of bicycle lanes were constructed, and 200 automated bicycle sharing stations were planned, of which 50 had been built. Now, furthermore, he modernized rail transport with several level crossings on the city's commuter rail network, replaced by tunnels, improving road traffic flow. More trains were added so that passengers did not have to wait more than a few minutes. Under Macri's leadership, the city also committed to engage in 2 large-scale rail infrastructure projects. These had viaducts through the center of the city, extending the Belgrano Sur line and raising the San Martin line level crossings, and Macri started the Expreso Regionales project to link the city's main railway termini and railway lines through a series of underground tunnels. This day of the Buenos Aires Underground still had 100-year-old wooden cars. Macri had them replaced with a fleet of modern cars. Macri had many, many new underground stations opened. Now this transformed a city that had been as fucked up, you might say, as Mexico City in its worst days, which right now actually, in terms of the traffic congestion, into one of the most modern cities in the world in terms of being able to get around. Now this is something people appreciate. They're not too much interested in all of this Peronist infighting. What they are interested in is who's going to supply them with something. Now, during all of this, of course, Macri was at war with labor. I'll go through that in your book. I don't need to do it. You can imagine, well, you can read pretty quickly what that's all about. There was a spy scandal where he and his father got caught tapping the telephones of everybody, including people in their own party. And we don't have to go through all of that. So there was a lot of trouble with reorganizing the police. But none of this, the voters didn't really care. What they cared about was the fact that for once they could get from A to B in Buenos Aires not only safely but comfortably and efficiently. Now, the Panama Papers revelation also showed that he and his dad had been involved in all kinds of stuff with a Bahamian offshore company, all of which was probably true, but again, the voters really didn't care. Macri ran for president of Argentina in the 2015 presidential elections, and as I go through the details of that, but I'm not going to do it here because we're running out of time. As president, he was inaugurated on the 10th of December 2015, so it's just he's been in office just a little over half a year, and he promised to reduce inflation, improve conditions for business, end the international alignment with Venezuela and Iran. And he has improved conditions for big business, and he has aligned his regime with the U.S. axis against Brazil and Venezuela. And I go through in the last part of this chapter all of the details of all the machinations of the Gringo regime, everybody getting involved. The CIA has called out all the stops that have sent to Obama and Kerry and everybody else down there. I have a little section called Foreign Dogs, talking about the Gringo lapdog German Angela Merkel, the Italian yapping dog Matteo Renzi, the French poodle Francois Hollande, the British growling bulldog David Cameron, how they all got hauled into this, congratulating Macri, saying how much they wanted to help him with his new right-wing government in Argentina. Well, as you might imagine, things have gone from bad to worse as far as the masses of the people of Argentina are concerned. I've been following that pretty closely in Prensa Latina and in Telesur. That's what I would recommend that you go to for information, or to the Latin American page or America's page at Xinhua, or on Beijing People's Daily, or RT. Those are all good sources. I used to be able to recommend Sputnik, but now that English page has been turned into a Trotskyite rag, I can't really stand to read it myself, so I can't very well recommend it to you. But there's plenty of good sources in English between Telesur, Prensa Latina, Beijing People's Daily, Xinhua's America's page, RT, for you to keep a close watch on what happens. What do I think is going to happen? I think that they're going to overplay their hand in Argentina because they don't really have any choice. If they can't go all the way with this guy, when will they ever be able to? So I think they're going to throw everything they've got, plus the kitchen sink, into defeating Macri's opponents, and that they will fail, because up against them is Mrs. Kirchner, who's still alive, and she's going to be leading the Peronist opposition. This is the country that has never forgotten Eva Perón or Juan Perón, and the Peronista movement is still the most important thing in the country, and I think that the masses are going to be mobilized to destroy the Macri regime and its CIA backers one way or the other. Well, that's my personal opinion. Next lectures we're going to go on to Uruguay and Paraguay, and we'll be done with this part of the ABCs of Communism lectures for the moment.